What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the TCL Stylus 5G and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. Now before we go any further, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting a 6.81-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 395, an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, and a 90.2% screen-to-body ratio. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting a 6.8-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 395, an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, and an 85.8% screen-to-body ratio. So between these two phones here, as far as the displays go, they're pretty much identical in almost every way. The only real difference here is that with the Moto G Stylus 5G, the bezels are just a tiny bit thicker, which in the grand scheme of things really doesn't matter. And the Moto G Stylus 5G does have a 120Hz refresh rate, whereas with the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting a standard 60Hz display. In case you don't know, what this means is basically the movement on the screen with the Moto G Stylus 5G is going to be a little bit faster and smoother. You're really not going to be able to see it in this video, but I will say when you're actually using the phones, if you're doing something like watching a video, playing a game, something with movement on the screen, you will get a slightly better experience with the Moto G Stylus 5G. But in general, it's not going to make a huge difference, so I definitely wouldn't base a decision on which phone to get on that alone. So at the end of the day, both displays are great and you're really not going to go wrong with either of them. Now as far as storage goes, with the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and the Moto G Stylus 5G is getting 256GB with microSD card expansion as well. Now I'm not 100% sure, but there might be carrier versions of this phone that only have 128GB, but this specific phone in my hand is the factory unlocked version, so definitely keep this in mind. But that being said, between these two, as you can see here, the Moto G Stylus 5G does have a huge advantage in storage, having double the space of the TCL Stylus 5G. But then again, I definitely wouldn't call 128GB small, so unless you're really a power user and you have a bunch of apps and photos and videos and stuff like that, you're really not going to go wrong with either phone. Now neither of these phones has wireless charging, not very surprising there, but for security features, both phones do have fingerprint scanners on the power keys, definitely a nice spot for a fingerprint scanner, and they both have face unlock as well. But starting with the TCL Stylus 5G, let's go ahead and give these fingerprint scanners a try and see how well they work. There we go, one more time. And there we go. Moving on to the Moto G Stylus 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, both fingerprint scanners worked really well. And again, remember, both phones also do have face unlock, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, with the TCL Stylus 5G, we got a nice looking hole punch for the front facing camera, and this camera is 13 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we got pretty much the same design for the selfie camera, and this camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera that also doubles as a macro camera, so definitely keep that in mind, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So as far as features go, these phones have pretty much everything for cameras, great regular cameras, ultra wide cameras, macro cameras, all that stuff, but I would say that in general, as far as quality goes, the Moto G Stylus 2022 does take slightly better photos. So if you want the best pictures between the two, I would suggest the Moto G Stylus 5G, but honestly, no matter what, again, both phones do have great cameras, and if you want to get a lot of nice pictures, you're really not going to go wrong with either of them. But that being said, if you want to see actual photo and video samples, be sure to check out my full reviews of each phone, which I will be linking to in the description. Now for video, both phones do have a max recording quality of 1080p, so no 4K or anything, but with the Moto G Stylus 5G, you can record at 60 frames per second, whereas you can only record in 30 with the TCL Stylus 5G. So with the Moto G Stylus 5G, unfortunately, again, there's no 4K, but at least we get that higher frame rate, so if you want to get smoother clips, or maybe get a good slow motion video or something like that, then with this phone, that is an option. So I would say because of this in general, if you're recording a lot of videos and you're using them for something other than social media, so maybe like YouTube or something, then the Moto G Stylus 5G will have a bit of an advantage. But then again, with these two phones, the overall video quality is so similar that you could really choose either of them and be perfectly fine. Now, as far as RAM and processor go, with the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 700 processor. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting 8GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor. Now, I ran Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both phones, And with the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting a single core score of 560 and a multi-core score of 1755. And with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting a single core score of 622 and a multi-core score of 1928. So as you can see here, the Moto G Stylus 5G is a little bit faster, but really not by much. And in general, as far as performance goes, although again the Moto G Stylus is faster on paper, you're probably not going to notice the difference too much unless you're doing something like higher end mobile gaming. But that being said, obviously if you want the faster phone of the two, the Moto G Stylus 5G will have an advantage. But if you're doing basic activities like web browsing and social media and stuff like that, again these phones do have pretty similar performance and you're really not going to go wrong with either of them. Now as far as battery goes, with the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting a 4000 mAh battery that supports 18 watt fast charging, and the Moto G Stylus 5G has a 5000 mAh battery that supports 15 watt fast charging. So clearly here the Moto G Stylus 5G does have a pretty big advantage. While a 4000 mAh battery isn't exactly small, a 5000 mAh battery is one of the biggest batteries you can get on the US market. So if the battery life and longevity is important to you, then the Moto G Stylus 5G is probably going to be a better choice. But if you just leave your phone plugged in all day and you don't really care a whole lot about battery life, then just know that although the TCL Stylus 5G isn't going to have nearly as good battery life as the Moto G Stylus 5G, it still definitely is acceptable. Another thing to keep in mind here is that both phones do have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, just know that you can do that with either phone. In addition to this, both phones also do have styluses, and that's definitely not a feature you see every day in a mid-range phone. There are really only a handful that do have styluses, so if you really want a stylus, definitely keep this in mind. But that being said, between the two, I do think the Moto G Stylus 5G does have a much better stylus. While still not being anywhere near the level of something like a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra for example, I was actually really impressed with the stylus on this phone. It's a big improvement from the Moto G Stylus 5G 2021. And in general, if you're doing stuff like taking handwritten notes, navigating through the phone, and maybe playing a game or something like that, then the stylus on this phone will definitely get the job done. Now on the other hand, while the stylus on the TCL Stylus 5G really isn't bad either, I just didn't think it was quite as impressive as the Moto G Stylus. Now when you're taking notes and stuff, it does feel a tiny bit faster, but at the same time it doesn't feel nearly as accurate. So if you're doing something like playing a game for example, it's going to be a lot harder on the TCL Stylus than it will be on the Moto G Stylus. But at the end of the day, when it really comes down to it, both of them are styluses on mid-range phones, so you can really only expect so much. Neither stylus is bad, I will say that. They both definitely will get the job done, but again, I personally prefer the stylus on the Moto G Stylus 5G a lot better. And on the other hand, again, if you want a stylus, I still don't think the TCL Stylus 5G would be a bad choice either. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, despite them being really close and in some ways almost identical, I do think the Moto G Stylus 5G for the most part is a better device. It has a slightly higher refresh rate, which is going to give you a better experience when you're doing stuff like streaming videos and playing games for example. I also like the photo quality on the Moto G Stylus a little bit better, and it can record videos at 60 frames per second, whereas the TCL Stylus 5G can only record in 30. And in addition to this, the Moto G Stylus 5G has a larger battery and a more powerful processor. But that being said, the TCL Stylus 5G really is not a bad phone, and in some areas like the display for example, these phones are pretty much the same. In addition to this, while pricing and availability is always changing, in general you're probably going to get the TCL Stylus 5G for a little bit less than the Moto G Stylus 5G, so if you're looking for the most affordable option, definitely keep this in mind too. But this concludes my comparison between the TCL Stylus 5G and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. Again, if you want to learn more about either of these phones, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability because this is always changing. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next one.